Okay, Emily Dust, Code 9, and Plastician. Yeah, I ain't gonna lie, I'm feeling a bit heavy, but as I said at the start of the conversation earlier on, I did that day night. I spoke with Manga, Shan, SP, and Ian McQuaid. Um, right before I went to go live, didn't really feel like doing it at all. I was like, oh, like, not really on it, but I know it had to be done. So I got in there, we went and I spoke, and we spoke for 2 hours, and we chopped it up. And maybe it came natural to me. I know I've been talking about race within music and just race in general over 30 years. Musically talking about race a lot. I mean, Nine, you would know, like, I talk about race, I see it, and I've been and a lot of talking about race in the last 10 years. It's like it's either I'm seeing it more, it's happening more, I don't know. But I got in there and I spoke about it. So my thing was to bring it together, to get in there and speak about it. This isn't an interview. I know there's people in the chat room who might have some questions, but I want you guys to get in there and chop it up and discuss racism within the music industry.
Evening.
Steve, KODE, evening.
Um,
Nice to
yeah,
see
I
you.
mean, as Scratcher just said, it's not a new thing. Obviously, recent events have put a focus on certain racial dynamics and so on. But I remember in the 90s when Britpop was being celebrated as the voice of British music, at exactly the same time Jungle was going on. And so there's a deeply systemic thing of like how Britain sees its musical identity, which in the 90s was like indie, Britpop, and so on. While probably the most um, one of the most positive cultural phenomena that Britain has ever produced was going on at the same time, but that wasn't seen as representative of British identity. So yeah, I mean that's just to say that you're right. It's not a new issue. It's a very long issue. If you look at the history of reggae and dub, dancehall in this country, lovers rock, and so on, they're all dealing with the problems of being British and being racially subordinated and economically subordinated and so on. So I mean, the problem about the focus just now is that it all takes a lot of it takes the form of charity. And while it's great that people are donating money to causes and trying to change their organizations and make their organizations more accountable and things like that, the fact that we're having to give the fact that it's framed in terms of charity is just a symptom of the problem. You're not gonna solve it by just giving charity. While it's important, um, I kind of agree with some of the points in the first discussion about the importance of black autonomy, black run record labels, and there is plenty of black artists releasing their own music, but if they're somehow looked down upon by the music press because they haven't necessarily grown up with certain white middle class niceties about how to present yourself, how to write a press release, and so on, then it somehow gets overlooked. And you look at some of the black artists, black British artists who do get more serious coverage in the music press. You look at what they've had to do that, and I think good examples would be someone like Actress or Dean Blunt. And the way they've had to do that is by turning their back on the media a lot of the time, not playing the media game, turning their back on it, and somehow gaming it. Using it in a way that is on their terms and not on the mainstream media's terms. So certainly more black run labels, but it doesn't matter if there's black run labels if they're not getting support by the rest of the industry. They don't get recognized by the other platforms. So it's black run labels and black run platforms seems pretty important, and black run clubs, which is not to just push the issue over there, it's like do it for yourself, but seems important to reinforce that idea when white liberal guilt, which is obviously what is dominating a lot of social media activity just now, um, it's not, you know, it's not enough to just have charity, not enough to have like equal representation within your company. You know, that's, if it's a white run company, then you're going to run up against the same issues.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Steve. Race has been something that I guess, you know, kind of particularly as a white person, operating in heavily steeped roots of music genres that have heavily steeped roots in black culture, black music. It's become apparent to me down the years in, like, you know, like little incidents that maybe have happened, things like trying to get into a club with a group of my black friends versus trying to get into a club with a group of white friends. And it's so like the thing I've been trying to understand through all of this is just trying to speak to a lot of my peers in the music industry, friends, people I went to school with, and not just people that I know, but also reaching out to people who follow me on social media, who have shared some really good opinions in the last few weeks, to try and understand and get a bigger picture of like what it is that we really need to be doing, rather than just posting up who we've donated to or like how much we've raised, which is like putting a plaster on like a massive open wound in our society. So we're in a position, you know, like I think that it's important that that we have these conversations. And for me, I think that one thing, as white people involved in the music industry, we need to be a lot better at listening and less about the talking, as much as that's probably like completely ridiculous watching this now, a group of white people discussing race. But it's important, and I feel like it's a shame that it took such a massive tragedy to bring these conversations to the forefront. And I'm quite ashamed actually that I haven't had this kind of conversation with more of my black friends in like recent times before this. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But I do think that like we need to be thinking more long term already. We're not really talking about what happens in 2 or 3 weeks when you know, when the protests die down. Where's the long term? What are the long term goals that we need to achieve? You know, and what steps are people taking beyond? You know, posting, like Steve said, it is a little bit dangerous that it's kind of being positioned in this like role of charity. It shouldn't be a charity, and it shouldn't be made to look like it. It should be a support network. It should be a level playing field for all, and that starts with conversation and listening, and the next step after that is action. And I'm really interested in discussing with more people about like what does action really look like beyond just talking about what percentage of money we're going to shift here or there, or, you know, like people need to feel like a part of this. And I think that one of the overarching themes that I've been getting from speaking to black people this week is there aren't these support networks. There aren't, you know, they don't feel like they're a part of a lot of the music industry, and they feel closed out, and that's ridiculous. It's shocking, but it's something that I've heard multiple times speaking to friends of mine, and like I say, some people who aren't friends, but people who whose voices I picked up on in the week. And I think that's something that I think is really important to discuss today.
I was just going to say, I definitely agree that collective action is probably the way forward. You know, I, like probably quite a few people on this panel, felt a bit weird about being on a panel talking about it, because I felt like I shouldn't be taking up space. But then I thought, well, actually, you have a voice, you've got to use it, and no one's supposed to be comfortable having this conversation. It's not like a comfortable conversation, but we have to keep having it, not just this week, not just next week, but continually, because it has been there. And I think thinking about collective action for me is about being bigger than individual actions. Like, we could all be on this panel and be like, oh, well, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and that's all great and it's part of it. But we together as a music community could do a lot more. And I think, you know, donation is, it's an individual action that you do and you feel good, and however much money you do donate, you're still choosing to give to one particular organization over another, and there are so many organizations that deserve our support. You know, what else could we do to change the structure that means that these charities are reliant on money from us? You know, could we be writing to our MPs? Could we be asking for funding for better things? You know, there's so many other things we could be doing as well as giving money. And I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's like, oh, I don't think donation's going to help, so I won't. It's like, we've got to do a bit of everything and kind of keep doing a bit of everything and keep kind of a united focus on this.
Jam Supernova's said, question for Emily: what are her thoughts on the world music scene mostly being run by white people in terms of labels and club nights?
I think it's really weird. Like, I think the term world music is really uncomfortable, and personally I would never use it to describe any of the music I play, because I don't think any of the artists who would, you know, get called world music would use it about themselves either. And I think sometimes that label is used by people in the West who are usually white, thinking, oh, how do I group all this global stuff together? You know, and I think the term global club is problematic too, because that's a genre that brings together lots of different global genres, but those genres already have names. So why don't we just say gom or ballet funk or kuduro? Because, like, why do we need to like create something that packages it for other people, probably white Europeans, to understand? And I think, you know, it's your responsibility when you go to different countries and talk to artists, you know, to find out how they want to call their music and then call it that, you know. And if people go, oh, I don't know what kuduro is, then it's your job to tell them, you know, don't give it. I think world music is a deeply uncomfortable term. You know, I have read articles saying that at the time it was done well intentioned, but that was like 30 years ago. So I think, you know, we shouldn't really be using that term at all.
I think that's right. I think it's a racist term, basically, world music. And, you know, it's not the only racist music term, or racist genre term, or somehow kind of imperialist genre term, because it happens all the time where, you know, people in certain foundational electronic music genres then claim that everything that came after that is that genre. So, like, jungle gets relegated to being a subset of techno, or gom is seen as a subset of techno, when actually, you know, there's techno blood in the veins somehow, but they're, as Emily said, they're their own thing. They've grown up locally with their own culture, with their own name, and there's something problematic about erasing that name into like an umbrella catch-all term, whether it be world music or global, like you said, global bass, or any, you know, even bass music is kind of a grab bag of so many different genres that, you know, just be specific.
Are those on the panel cognizant of the nuances that surround visibility in music? Black visibility in music. Aesthetics quotas. Black art is only monetizable when repackaged with a white glaze over it. Are you aware that white privilege also allows you to take up space that aren't necessarily yours? Tell me, how do you attribute the center the black artists that you admire?
Yeah, I think that's a massive thing, and I feel like very aware of it. I started DJing quite late. I started DJing and actually stopped for a long time because I worked at a radio station which played black music, and I was like, this isn't my music, I need to shut up and listen. And I started to feel after a few years that a lot of the black music that I really liked from, you know, South Africa, West Africa, Brazil, wasn't getting played. So I thought, well, maybe it's my role to kind of showcase this and like elevate black artists that I don't see getting played elsewhere. But yeah, I think about it a lot, and I think, you know, for me, one of the ways I do. So for people who don't know me, I present a radio show, make documentaries, DJ, run a club night, or used to in like before this time. And yeah, I think for my radio show, which is really the main thing that I do, I felt like really weird about presenting it for a long time, because I felt like, should I be this person? And I know there are lots of white presenters who present black music, but it doesn't mean there necessarily needs to be anymore. But then I was talking to a friend, and she was like, I think you're like putting a bit too much emphasis on yourself, because your job is to show people music they don't know about. And so for me, I try not to center myself, and I try to talk about the artists. And when I talk about the artists, I try to talk about them as people, and I try to talk about the countries that they come from. Like, GOM is not just like something that exists on the internet, and yet a lot of people here, when they started playing it, it was like, oh, I found this new thing, and then, you know, a year, 2 years later, they're like on to the next thing. It's like there's a whole load of people who make that music. Like, let's tell their stories and, you know, give them ownership of the music and put that at the forefront of the way you talk about it.
I wanted to ask all of you actually, because Plastician, I know this wasn't supposed to be an interview, but this is out of my mind. I don't want it to get forgotten about. I know you. You was actually the first person to be brought onto the in New DJs We Trust, or is it, or Residency?
That's right. Yeah. So it was called
like,
the Residency. Yeah.
Yeah. So you was the first person from grime to be brought into the Residency.
Yeah.
You've worked in music, in radio. Sorry, like you know the drill. You know, you've worked around. I mean, can we even talk about this? The DJs you've worked around.
In what sense? What do you mean?
Not you. Sorry, I was talking to Emily there. Talking to Emily, but don't worry.
Oh, right.
Code 9, also another person who's DJ and producer who's been picked up by Natalia to do. I think it was the Residency. And what I wanna say is, do you see a pattern? Because I've definitely seen a pattern since the start. Like,
You know,
like, what's going to be done about that? I don't even know if I should be asking you that question, but
I mean,
something to be done about that.
I don't have any answers, but I've got questions. I mean,
yeah,
even the division between Radio 1 Extra is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because it creates this it basically creates a black ghetto, a black radio ghetto, and obviously there should be more black DJs on Radio 1. A lot of the music that's being played is black. A lot of the specialist shows in the evening are totally black music. But you know, it's great that 1 Extra exists, but I do feel sometimes that it takes away some of the pressure to do what you're talking about, having more black DJs on the Residency things and DJs we at. You know, it's great there's a specialist channel with 1 Extra with all the stuff that they platform there, but I do get a sense that it takes a bit of heat off the programmers of Radio 1 to be consistent with that channel as well. And just to go back to the earlier question that somebody asked, I'm very aware that because of the way our label Hyperdub has evolved, because of the music I play in my DJ sets, that I'm aware that if we're trying to promote a black artist, for example, trying to get press for the release and so on, you know, it might make it a little bit easier that they're on our label than if they were on their own or running their own label, because for whatever reason we've acquired a reputation of being some kind of gatekeeper, tastemaker, any of these kind of ideas of like some kind of filter, and people are overloaded with information. They want filters, so it's not a position I'm particularly happy with if it feels like it's stopping other black artists from getting the attention they need. But you know, ultimately that's our job as a label.
For me to jump in on the question, particularly about the BBC and my involvement there as well, to give people a little bit of an insight into how that came about for me and maybe not someone else. When I was brought in to do my pilot for the BBC, I think it was more a case for me, or at least it, you know, with hindsight, it probably wasn't, because I guess I was privileged enough that I knew a bit about the industry, had managed to get some money to get my music out there. John Peel had picked up some of my records and had been playing them on the BBC. And when he passed away, the residency was the show that was created to fill the slot. And at the time, I think I was 23 or something like that. So I think that like I was definitely a bit of like a rabbit in the headlights at the time, and I think that I wasn't even really thinking about why this opportunity was offered to me. With hindsight, I guess like from the BBC perspective, maybe the idea of bringing a DJ and MCs was just like seen as an absolutely insane potential idea to like put on Radio 1 at the night time. I think that now that maybe wouldn't be as much of an unusual idea, because I think that people have gotten more used to the music. And even, to be honest, when I did come on, I was surprised I managed to keep hold of the slot as long as I did. I think that that was a lot down to people trying to understand the music that I was playing, and I was trying my best to represent across the board. And I brought people like Skepta, JME on, Koki. I tried my best to represent across the board as much as possible. And to be honest with you, yeah, I think like back then I was in a scene that felt quite united and
Can I interject? Can I interject? Just,
yeah, of course, of course.
Just because, like, just to wrap that bit up there, like, clearly, it says, what was the word that Blaze used earlier? But it's like it's an ingrained thing, isn't it? It's an ingrained thing. Like, I know, I know you've done your work. You've done your work. You've done your work, Nine. Emily's done her work. Logan Sama's done his work. Slimsy's done his work. Maximum's done his work. Everybody else has done work as well. Do you know what I'm saying? And you got to see that, there is a clear problem with that. There's a clear problem with that. I'm not sure what it is, but it's like, is it because I don't know if I'm actually asking you this question. Let me just speak. Like, is it because white people want to see white people do stuff? I know I've said that before.
I think
radios bring the white people in to do the stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think in a lot of these big media platforms, white people are scared of what black people are going to do on air. Like what you're saying, like bringing a brown man, they're just petrified. They don't know what the fuck's going on. Don't know what's going to happen.
Well, that's got to change.
Worried their boss is going to tell them off. Something's going to happen. It's like there's a fear. It's not just in music. It's not just in media. There's a white fear of black people, black culture that I suppose needs to be addressed before any of this happens, when any of this changes properly. So it's like having trust that, black people are people. There's nothing weird about it. It's people. And yeah.
I think the people that were running the BBC back then were probably so far removed from like the realities of being in that world of like pirate radio, and maybe like you're saying, Scratch, it was like that kind of institutionalized like racism.
You say back then, but it's now, it's today. Like, have you seen the residency lineup now? Like, not just coming at people. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I don't want to put it to BBC like BBC's the be all and end all, but like it's not a back in the day thing, is what I'm saying. That's what I wanted to say. It's not a back in the day thing. It's now as well.
No, you're right, and I think that you made a very good point there. I think it isn't just a back in the day thing, and this is exactly what we're here to discuss. And yeah, for me, I think it was that people are that far removed from the culture and need to understand it more, rather than just trying to like tick boxes, make sure that they feel like they're doing their bit. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be more than that.
I think that's right, because tokenism is obviously an issue with a lot of this stuff. Like, obviously it's fine to have representation goals in terms of companies and so on, but if it's merely a matter of ticking boxes, then again, like the charity thing, it becomes a very short-term solution.
Are those on the panel cognizant of the nuances that surround black visibility in music. Black art is only monetizable when repackaged with a white glaze over it. Are you aware that white privilege also allows you to take up spaces that aren't necessarily yours? And then it says, tell me how you attribute and center the black artists that you admire.
What I said earlier about, being very aware that because we're a white run label and we have a lot of black artists on the label, that somehow that ticks a box for certain people, and so it makes the black artists work with more palatable than if they were representing themselves. And how do we send a black artist? Well, we try to. It's a question we have to deal with every time we have a release by a black artist, and work out how to get that music to reach not just as big an audience as possible, not just the audience that has money, which generally is white. The audience who are buying like weird electronic music, not like urban stuff, is generally mostly white men. So not just to reach that audience, but to try and connect with the audience that is their demographic. And that's a challenge, partly due to the number of stereotypes to do with urban music, and that came up earlier to do with what is it to be a black experimental artist, when there's this big thing of like a big set of stereotypes about what black music is, what urban music is, its relationship to the street, to the estate, to the pirate radio state, all of this stuff. And so it's very difficult for black artists who don't fit into these stereotypes to make space for themselves. So I don't know, there's a set of questions that we have to deal with every time we have a release by a black artist, and it's different every time because we have to handle different music differently, reaching different audiences. I can't say there's a straightforward answer to that, but it's something we're very aware of with every release we do, because we have a lot of black artists.
I definitely, it's definitely something that I've noticed a long time, and especially like trying to make sure that like giving opportunities equally, and trying to represent, particularly through the club nights that I was promoting a few years back. Actively trying to put black women on the lineup, because I recognized there was a massive gap of there was no black, obviously there not being enough female DJs was a big talking point a few years ago, but even before that I remember recognizing that we'd never see black women in a lot of the club nights that I played at, or that I put on, and made a point of putting black women on lineups. And I think that we're still miles behind in that, particularly in that part of the movement. Black women are massively misrepresented in particularly anything that crosses outside of the underground into the mainstream as well, to talk the question of repackaging, and the way that black women are marketed to certain audiences in rap and R&B, and they have to look a certain way, they have to dress and act and carry themselves a certain way. And I think that is something that is going to be one of the main things that needs to shift out of this, is particularly how black women are being packaged to a mainstream audience, and the lack of visibility for them in club nights, on festival stages, in the DJ circuit particularly. There's a massive misrepresentation for black women in the world of DJing, in my opinion.
I was just going to say, I totally agree with you, and I think there's also a perception there, I think when black women are doing amazingly, they aren't given all the credit. If you look at the club scene in London, probably the most exciting DJs across the board are black women, and that needs to be shouted about more by everybody at our level, so that it filters up. And I think I don't really do like quotas on my show, but I definitely look through the playlist. I definitely look through the guests, and I'm like, I need to make sure I have enough black women. I need to make sure I have enough black men. For me, that's really, really important, because I don't think there's any point in having a platform. You can look and say, oh, but these bigger platforms should be doing it, and the press should be writing, or you can be like, well, I need to start with my own platform, because that's the joy of DIY, is we can do what we want. And for someone who does a show on internet radio, I don't need to care about listening figures. I don't need to care about like making money for the station. So then, like, why the hell wouldn't I be booking a diverse lineup? The other thing I think is like, I don't know, I think we need to get away from this idea that like it's like a risk to book like an artist who isn't a white guy, and that's not something that I personally have control over on any massive scale, although we are really conscious of it on our club nights. But like, when you book a black woman, don't put her on the start of the lineup, and don't think about how you're presenting them. If you're booking somebody, are you presenting them in a particular way? Are you I personally, I fucking hate the term female DJ. So are you representing in a way that feels authentic to their art and what they do, and not who they are? Do you know what I mean? I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is so like last year I went to Zimbabwe and Zambia and like ran a series of DJ workshops alongside some African DJs who are women from across the continent, for African female DJs. And like that was, for me, like that was a great experience, because I felt like at first I was like, well, what am I doing here? And then I was like, I think there are things that in Britain are slightly better for women than are, like, definitely there's some there's a lot of work to be done in some countries in Africa about how women are marketed and how they're sold as DJs. And so I felt like if I can go and kind of share some of the knowledge about best practice here, that's kind of helpful. But since that trip, I've like bonded really well with the other mentors, and we keep talking about doing something together. And I think now I'm like, yeah, okay, I really need to get on and do that, because I think women generally, mentoring is shown to be a really helpful thing for women. So it stands to reason that that would also be really helpful for black women and women of all races. So if we can, I think I'd love to kind of start and see more mentoring schemes that specifically focus on helping black women. And I don't think that that's just other black women's responsibility to do that. I think everybody has a role to play, but women generally are really bad at reaching out and asking for help. So we all need to do more work, but particularly men, in looking for more women to book. They are there, like, and it's really tiring having to put yourself forward all the time, and there are lots of reasons why you might not do that if you're any kind of minority. So you just, like, we just have to put in the work to do the finding, and it's not that hard. You just have to look and you have to ask, and people are there and they want a platform. So it's also not about going, oh, I can't find any. Like, if you can't find any awesome black women to be on your lineup, you are not looking hard enough, because they're there. And
Yeah.
wicked.
When we started Zero, like, getting black artists was never the problem. It's not even a challenge. It's that's not the problem. There's plenty of amazing black artists. The challenge that we had was attracting a mixed crowd somehow.
Yeah.
So you black lineup, but if everyone in the crowd is white, something not quite right about that.
I was just about to say that could be down to a few things, and one being like, so say Zero, for example, is Corsica, yeah. If black people write Corsica, what's going to happen. You think everybody's going to get in? I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean,
I've seen
black artists have
That's
trouble
one
with
thing.
lower Corsica. I mean, I think generally Corsica's not bad when it comes to getting in, but at the same time, I've seen black artists and I've seen just kids have a lot of trouble because they get searched more intensely, and it's it's not pleasant. It's a nightmare. And it spoils your mood from before you've even got in. So that would certainly help to and again, it's a fear issue. You have bouncers who are, for whatever reason, petrified of having black audiences. So that needs to be like handled, whether it be like having a certain type of door staff for certain nights who are like a bit less ignorant, but yeah, I mean, cultivating an audience, I think, is more of cultivating the right kind of audience seems to me more of a challenge than having diverse lineups.
I think a lot of the problems with club culture in general in recent years have been down to everything moving to these enormous, like, super venues, and everything costs so much money, and it's, you know, like it's taken it from it's such a middle class activity now, to go to some of these club nights, and I think that's another, probably a completely separate conversation, but I think that that's trickled down to the smaller club nights and the more sort of like events where like more up and coming DJs can cut their teeth. We're losing all of that, and in losing that, we're losing opportunities for artists who are trying to find their voice or trying to like create a community. You can't create a community in a 10,000 capacity venue. It's not possible. I think because of that, a lot of the great things that I was fortunate enough to witness coming through the early like grime and dubstep circuit, just like actually meeting face to face with a lot of these people and understanding them a bit better, and being like actually being friends with these people. You know, like we're in little clubs on a Thursday night with like anything from 40 to 200 people. You kind of just got to know the people, and it just made for a much nicer kind of environment and a space to be in. So maybe that was a reason that maybe some of the events back then were slightly more diversely turned out than they are now.
I just want to say, like, as someone who's like, you know, been in the grime scene, you've probably seen the diversity change yourself, you know, from the party into these venues, and then there's no white people in the crowd. I mean, no black people in the crowd. What I want to put to you, this is something that Shannon actually brought up on the last show on Saturday, is that how about, and people are also saying this in the chat, how different factors. So, I mean, is it like another, like, say, black people getting free? Like, if black people still ain't coming, then maybe there's another issue. But black people free, white people pay. Is it something off the planet, or?
I mean, I think it's an interesting model to try and change things. I mean, you have to bear in mind that we usually make a loss when we do zero. So it's like doubling the loss, but you know, I think that would have a difference.
Would that be counterproductive? I think is like, is that like belittling? Is that a little bit condescending to?
Well, I don't know. Like they've been doing it with women for ages, like women free before 10. You know, all these old garage rave.
Yeah, but some of
Does that
those
still
nights you
happen?
don't want to go to as a woman. Some of the women free nights, you're like, whoa, I don't want to be there. Like you feel like you're being brought
attracts the
into
wrong. Exactly, it brings in the wrong kind of people. Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder if a model that has worked in other areas is the pay what you want. Like you could try something like that, couldn't you? Like that's actually, you know, and actually if we're looking at Bandcamp at the moment, that's pretty much like how a lot of releases are going, is pay what you want. And then people who feel, you know, able to and want to contribute more, they can. I wonder, like, if there's a way that we could do, because there's so many suggestions that are coming out of this, and I think like we all know that not just like talking about this, you know, it's not going to go away. I wonder if there's a way that we could have like some sort of manifesto as a result of this talk, or a sort of pledge that everybody can sign up to that's like public. I think like in Berlin they have this thing, I don't know if you know, they've got this thing called the Club Commission, and they are basically a group that work with like, you know, they support and kind of represent about 9,000 people who work in Berlin clubs. And they kind of lobby the government as a unit, I guess. They're like a pressure group, and they like look after individual interests. And they were behind United We Stream for COVID-19 and raised like 400,000 euros, which got split equally. So again, if you go back to that donations model, it wasn't, you know, if you look at the individual donations to clubs, like the big names got loads of funding. So, you know, Berghain got like 140,000 and Yam got like 30,000 to a reggae club. but United We Stream splits the money. So it's quite an effective kind of unity. And I remember thinking, like, I wish we had something like that in London. But I wonder if we could do something together, like everybody who's on this, and sign up. And then, there's like a fund that we could use to redistribute money to support projects that aren't necessarily going to get public funding, or, people can sign up to share their skills with like young black people who might, or older black people who might not have the experience of like writing funding applications or writing, the job application that's going to get them an interview at Boiler Room or whatever, or kind of an equipment fund. I don't know. It feels like there's definitely like an opportunity to sort of make something lasting together. I just wonder what you think of that.
I mean, I don't know what state the funding situation is going to be in after this COVID situation, because I know there was a fair amount of money sloshing around for like anything that could tick the diversity box. And so, you see all these like Tate Lates, all these big art institutions doing these late night things where they shove some DJs in, and in the hope that it's going to bring in the youth, a more diverse audience, a younger audience, a blacker audience, all of these things. I don't know what the situation is going to be like after this, but I definitely think some kind of cooperation and interdependence is needed, because like a lot of clubs are going to close after this virus situation. So there's going to be less venues, and London's a very different city from Berlin. It's a lot less cooperative somehow.
Yeah.
Like, the techno scene in Berlin has a very a different ethos to the very competitive music scene in London, I think. But I think some kind of cooperation is going to be needed to survive for a lot of clubs to survive after this.
This is the opportunity, isn't it, with COVID-19 happening, to actually like go, right, we're going to build something that explicitly prioritizes black musicians and black artists and black DJs in black music. I don't know, it feels like a chance to kind of draw something more concrete than chat, I guess.
I think for me, the problem with talking about that right now is it's almost impossible for me to even think about when clubs are going to open full stop, let alone how we're going to fund them or who we're going to even book to play in them, because like COVID is still a thing, and until we get that sorted out, like I think that we should be realistically keep like obviously the conversation going on what clubs need to be doing when they reopen, but the immediate attention should be drawn to supporting black people into the music business roles and giving people an opportunity to like get their feet in the industry elsewhere, because I don't think any of us are going to be clubbing anytime soon, honestly. And I don't know, I think that festivals are going to be the first people that need to react to this, because they'll be booking lineups. They probably are booking lineups for next summer. Club nights are not booking lineups for next summer. They don't book that far in advance most of the time. So I think talking about clubbing at the minute for me just feels mad, because I can't even think about when I'm going. Yeah.
I guess I brought up the club example in Berlin as like an example of collective action rather than like specifically like clubs, because I think you're totally right. Like the focus, we know clubs don't operate in a vacuum, just as music journalism doesn't operate in a vacuum, but it's more like, so in podcasting, there's like an equality pledge, and you can look it up online, and they talk about, things that like people have signed up to it. Lots of different audio companies have signed up to it and said like, these are the things we're going to pledge. And, you potentially look at asking people to sign up to a similar thing to the music industry.
I just want to say something. When these agents and whatever come to you, will you be speaking up for black people? Because I know I have. You know what I'm saying? You've seen me do it on my social media. Like, I know we can sit and we can talk, but I think same as in the chat room, people want to see stuff. People want to see, stuff afterwards. You get what I'm saying? Stuff now.
Absolutely.
So will you be actively saying, what about these DJs, or what? Like, will you be doing that? I want to see that happen. I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking generally for anyone who's listening who it applies to. not just you guys, everyone and anyone. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been doing. I work with the guys at Pirate Studios and helping them put artists in the studios and people on festival lineups and all kinds of stuff there. And we've been having these conversations, but it's about stepping it up and ensuring that we're more transparent with the public, and that goes for the work that I'll be doing through the label. If and when events do start up again, it will be something that I'm happy to be transparent about and open about. And I do feel like I have a good grasp on what's out there, but it's important to keep digging around for the new talent, and being available to people who need help. And I'm always, anyone who's watching this now, like if you've ever had a question or wanted some information, or maybe think that you might benefit from spending some time picking my brain about anything, like I'm open, I'm all ears.
Question: as people running club nights, are you having conversations with club owners about making these spaces more inclusive for Black people? Like, are you actually having these conversations?
Well, I mean, we do our night at Corsica Studio, and we have talked about issues at the door with the people who run it, because sometimes it's just been out of order for whatever reason. And of course, it's an ongoing conversation to try and make the situation as welcoming for the audience, and that starts in the queue. I mean, part of the problem with the club situation in London is how aggressive bouncers can be, how racist, or not just racist, or just aggressive. And it's like going through airport security sometimes. You're supposed to be going out to enjoy yourself, but there's a lot of paranoia that spoils that. So it's part of running a club in London, that you just need to be aware of how it's feeling for the people who are coming in. And if they feel intimidated by the way they were treated at the door, then of course you have to try and address that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that going forwards. We choose our venues, based on places that we think are going to be inclusive anyway. We'd never do one where we've, heard bad stories, but, you're also aware that you're limited by your own experience. So yeah, I'll definitely be asking people.
Will we see it?
I think we'll see a lot more. I think we'll see a lot more transparency from the clubs as well. Just on their platforms, they'll have to be transparent about it before we have to question them on it. Hopefully,
a year or two ago at Corsica, they started putting up, in a lot of clubs in London, just putting up safe space posters and just reassuring people that if anything happens in the club that they're not comfortable with, that they can complain and get that person thrown out, or that there's some solution to the uncomfortable situation. That wasn't always there, so that's changed in the last couple of years. So if we need to take that further to make it more specifically about Black audiences, then that's what needs to happen.
I was just going to say, I also think as a DJ, we play lots of places around the world, and particularly in Europe, some clubs have appalling door policies. So I'll definitely be doing that for like the bookings that I have out of London as well. I'll be asking what they do, because I think London has its problems, but there are other cities that are far worse. And I think it's important that we use our privilege to talk to the clubs in cities and countries where they have a less sophisticated understanding of these things sometimes.
I mean, I've seen a few people suggest white DJs having clauses on their contracts to say, we're not going to play this event unless it has a certain amount of art, Black artists, or a certain balance and so on. I don't know how that would go down, especially in a lot of European festivals, which clearly don't really give a fuck about any of this stuff we're talking about. I mean, let's face it, in a lot of countries, they really don't give a fuck about this stuff. For whatever reason, there's hardly any Black people in the country. It's not a pressing issue for them. So hopefully this situation just now will raise a certain level of awareness a bit wider, but it's equally possible that it would just provoke a backlash like it's doing in politics, where, white people get all defensive and hunker down in their own little world and don't want to engage with these issues.
You know, you only have to look at the odd like thread on Twitter when the right wing side of Twitter gets involved in a thread about Black Lives Matter to see exactly like the kind of backlash you would expect to see from especially like some like KODE mentioned some of those European festivals. And
I mean, you just have to look at what techno Twitter is like sometimes to realize, you know, that it's not just on Twitter. That's festivals, club nights, record labels. They really don't give a fuck about any of these issues.
This is it. It needs to change from, you know, from within, and whether or not that would help push the agenda a bit more, I don't know. There must be ways to do it, and I think it starts with educating the people who are not behaving within the right manner, and understanding why the industry feels like it's time for change.
Just before actually I wrap this one up, there was a question for Tom Lee. Tom Lee, why did you take comfort receiving considerable better pay at Radar Radio whilst knowing that a lot of other PLC workers at the place were violated and overworked? In fact, why did you take comfort in shirking a lot of your work responsibilities onto a younger PLC whilst lapping up your considerable paycheck, knowing full well that as a white man at the establishment, you were directly benefiting from, I guess that's supposed to be black people. Then Tom says, I was at Radar less than a year. While I was there, directly responsible for pay rises for several junior members of staff. When I found out how little they got paid, and in internal meetings, I repeatedly questioned the lack of diversity among senior staff, though I wasn't in a position to say who was in management roles. Obviously, my position and pay there benefited from white privilege. That goes without saying. And if I had known when taking a job about what had happened at the station previously, then I wouldn't have. I quit the station the day those allegations came to light. Hope that answers your question. All right. Thank you, Plastician. Thank you, Code 9. Thank you, Emily Dust, for coming in.
Thank
And
you,
yeah,
Scratch.
I think that
Cheers,
that's
mate.
all good. I think the whole thing of it is like we could just seeing action. You know what I mean? Seeing action, seeing a change. You know me. I like if I have. I know that we keep talking about Twitter and stuff, but I feel like applying pressure on Twitter is not always a bad thing. You know what I mean? I'll just call it out. I call it out on Twitter. You know what I mean? Because I can. You know, and I feel like if more people are calling out stuff in emails, on Twitter, whatever, then we can see change. And just, I think people want transparency, because we could talk here all day and all night about it, but then it could be, you know what I mean? It's like a lot of black squares, right? You know, for the major labels, like bag of black squares, bag of black squares. But what are the major labels doing today? Exactly, you know what I mean? So it's about transparency going forward, I think, is the main thing. But again, I want to thank you for coming. Thanks, and yeah, thanks to all the people in the chat.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers, Scratch.
Okay, so Black Madonna can't be with us, but she has sent some audio for us to listen to.
Hey everybody, it's Maria. I'm sorry I can't be there with you, but I want to thank first and foremost Scratch for having me, and I wish I was there to listen to everything he had to say and everything you all had to say, and I don't have a whole lot to add, but I do just want to say that the one thing I want to commit to this year and in the future is just making sure that
I made a
there's
cliffhanger.
less talk and more walk.
Right, the
and
cliffhanger.
showing up for people is really, at the end of the day, all that matters. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the optics of any situation. But what really matters is what you do and who you are and how much you can show up for people. And I hope everybody is safe and inspired and fired up and ready to go, because everybody has the opportunity to serve, and that is a blessing.